right, good afternoon. Did not realize that we were competing with ice cream, which is unfortunate. But thank you for making your way back. I hope you have some ice cream in hand so that we can drool up here after that. We like to start off actually by asking something of you, and that is to take a quick survey. So if you can do the short URL, if you have a fancier phone, hopefully it might automatically do the QR code for you. If you can't get to it, don't worry, not the end of the world, but we want a little feedback from you. And in this, we want to ask a simple question, that have you observed either yourself or someone else make assumptions about an individual's knowledge of a process, a technology, a language, based on the role title? We'll give a quick pause. You should be able to continue to do so as we advance. Again, don't sweat too much if you don't get to it. So we'd like to start with a story. And this story is from a 2008 article in the New York Times. There was a nurse who was in a hospital in Washington who was becoming concerned that her patient was increasingly becoming more and more in danger. Her patient was this boy who had a shunt in his brain to help drain fluid. But the nurse started to observe that this patient was beginning to vomit, he was complaining of extreme headaches, and both of these are signs that the shunt potentially is blocked, which becomes a potentially life-threatening situation. So the nurse paged the on-call physician 3 times and explained her concerns, but repeatedly the on-call ignored her. And to quote from the article, what the nurse reported the doctor said, literally, "You don't know what to look for, you're not a doctor." The nurse eventually escalated to the attending physician at home, and the boy was finally rushed into surgery to address the issue with the shunt. What's terrifying is that the boy could have died since the nurse was being ignored for her as being perceived as less technical or less educated. So today we'd like to discuss about how everyone is taught technical and ways in which you can own your own experience bias. There we go. I am Kyle Harper. I'm a lead engineering manager with Cerner within our Emerging Technology Services organization.
And I'm Ben Cross. I'm a senior project manager also at Cerner in the CernerWorks Emerging Technology Services org.
So what's the challenge? What's the problem that we're trying to address here? I like to start with a quote from one of Cerner's founders, Neil Patterson, and that we recognize that a diverse associate base is a natural byproduct of seeking out the very best in people to work for Cerner, and hopefully your organizations also. We are fortunate enough to enjoy working in a culture where people with different benefits and characteristics find commonality in working together to improve the health of individuals and communities worldwide. Like I said, hopefully this is not an unfamiliar concept for you. I am very grateful that our industry, that this is continuing to improve, and hopefully is within your organization also. However, for your consideration, we are proposing that discrimination based on experience is still tolerated, even in many other organizations that might otherwise value diversity. Now, to potentially address an elephant in the room, I do want to recognize that Ben and I, we both have privilege based on several aspects of our identity, and we're not necessarily subjected to many forms of discrimination that others may be similar to this topic. But for the purposes of this talk, we are focusing solely on technical discrimination. To be frank, we've also been guilty of exhibiting this behavior, and we've been on the receiving end.
So let's go back and talk about some of the origins of technical bias, why we actually see this type of bias. And we can do this by examining our opening story. So how can we explain what caused the doctor to assume that the nurse was less knowledgeable? And we can do this by looking at the story through a psychological lens. So if we go back to the 1950s, the psychologist Herbert Simon introduced the concept of bounded rationality. And bounded rationality says that as human beings, we strive to act fully rational in all of our decisions, but that our ability to act rationally is limited by the amount of information we can take in and the amount of time that we have to make those decisions. So fast forward to the 1970s, the psychologists Eamon Tversky and Daniel Kahneman introduced the concept of heuristics. And what heuristics does is it gives our brains sort of a rule of thumb or shortcuts to fill in the gaps presented by bounded rationality. So they give us little rules of thumb that let us believe that we're acting in the most rational manner possible. And these are really central to how humans have thought throughout human history. So going back to our distant ancestors who thought, boy, that animal has really big teeth, I should probably run away, to knowing that the sweet taste of blueberries tells us that they're good for us, and the bitter taste of the cotoneaster tells us that they're poisonous. And heuristic cues really help us out throughout our daily lives, and we've undoubtedly used many of them so far today, from deciding what to wear, to what to eat for lunch, to what route to take to get here today. And perhaps on your way here, you heard a siren behind you and saw flashing lights, and so you instinctively pulled over. Hopefully you weren't the one getting pulled over. But those, you probably didn't read police or fire or ambulance and let that be kind of the determinant of what caused you to get over. You probably didn't stop them, ask them where they're going, try to decide if that was worth pulling over for. You took that limited information and you were able to act correctly in that situation. So this is an example of the representativeness heuristic, where you judge the likelihood of a person or an object's membership to a category based on how closely that object or person matches what you expect to be the typical member of that category. So heuristics are great. They let us act appropriately with limited information, with limited amount of time, but they can also cause errors and issues known as cognitive bias, because the heuristics that we use are ultimately subject to any underlying bias that we have. An example of this is in a study published by the Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology. Given patients with identical case histories, mental health clinicians were found to be more likely to diagnose female patients with histrionic personality disorder, which is essentially overly emotional, and were more likely to diagnose men with antisocial personality disorder. So through the representativeness heuristic, these clinicians actually allowed their gender bias and stereotypes to influence a clinical diagnosis. And we all exhibit cognitive bias, even if it's not as egregious as misdiagnosing a patient. Take an example where maybe you're going to hang a picture. So you're going to put a nail in the wall, and you go out to the garage to get your hammer, and you can't find your hammer. So you're going to keep looking and looking. All the while, you probably could have banged the nail into the wall with a wrench. Sure, that's not what it was designed for, but it can still serve that same function. And this is an example of the functional fixedness cognitive bias, where we believe that an object works only in one particular way or to complete one particular task. And we tend to become more prone to the functional fixedness cognitive bias with age and experience. So as parents repeatedly tell their children that walls serve the function of separating rooms and not as a canvas for artwork, the children eventually learn what things should be used for and not what they could be used for. So representativeness heuristic, functional fixedness bias, let's bring that all back to our opening story. How can we use those to explain the doctor's actions? Well, the doctor used the nurse's title as the doctor used a representativeness heuristic to make assumptions based on the nurse's title, and consequently fell victim to the functional fixedness cognitive bias by essentially assuming that the nurse could only administer medications, monitor vitals, and that making a diagnosis was not a function that that nurse could serve. So everyday decision-making tool of the heuristics essentially led to a near fatal mistake.
Thank you. So you may be thinking, but wait, not me. And to be frank, that's how I initially thought. So we're going to take a look at the poll. We're not going to be so brave as to try to pull it up live, but we're going to pull up my phone real quick and see what everyone said. If the internet plays nice. So the vast majority, only one brave soul didn't claim to this, and I would potentially like to debate whether that's true or not. But it sounds like the vast majority of us recognize that this is a challenge that we have encountered amongst our organizations. I'd like to introduce a concept called the bias blind spot, excuse me, tongue twister. You haven't seen this before. And there's a great example from researcher Aaron McCormick at Carnegie Mellon University. And in this example, they interviewed physicians and asked that when they receive gifts from pharmaceutical companies, do they think about those gifts? Do those gifts influence their decisions when they are prescribing medications? And all the pharmacists said, oh, of course, absolutely not, that at the time of deciding what medication to administer, like the gifts aren't in my head. I don't think about it. It's not part of the decision. However, when you ask those same physicians whether they think gifts might unconsciously influence other physicians' decisions, they all wholeheartedly agree, of course it does. Like, there's no way it doesn't, right? While continuing to believe that they themselves are not subjected to that bias. And that disparity is the bias blind spot. It occurs for everyone and for all sorts of different forms of judgments and decisions. So I'd like to share a personal anecdote, and this really, to be frank, is what led to the seed of this discussion. Because I, for better and worse, am in a role at Cerner where I tend to get somewhat random, cold questions from folks. And as I was doing so, I observed this pattern in my behavior where I had a tendency to look that person up in Outlook, see who they are, see what organization they belong to, see what their role is, who they're reported to. And at the time, I think I justified it because I was trying to maybe perhaps custom tailor my response to them, to better tailor my response to them. But I started looking at how I was responding and realized that I was responding differently to different roles than to others. Was I potentially unfairly giving a less thorough response to one role versus another? Despite my best intentions to treat everyone equally, I may have been unconsciously discriminating against some of my associates. And you see this theme, frankly, all over the web. You can find lots of various examples. There's one from 2014. I won't name the blogger specifically, but there is a fairly well-debated DevOps blog out there where software engineering was essentially asserting that software engineers are perched at this top of the ladder of this rung system, and that having them participate in DevOps was essentially a waste of their expertise, that every role on top of this ladder could do the role lower on the rungs. And I simply disagree with this notion. We all have some form of technical expertise. We all bring in a diverse set of experiences, and we all have different skills that we bring to our organization. Could a developer necessarily be as an effective UX designer as a real, someone trained to be in UX design? Could be as effective as a test analyst, a Linux administrator. To be frank, as I've spent a good chunk of my career practicing system engineering, and I've been spoken down to from developers. And all this is really an example, again, of the fictional cognitive bias, where we assume that because of a certain role, you only can do certain things.
So most of us in this room said that we have encountered technical bias, but so what? Why should we care? What are the consequences of technical bias? Well, technical bias can lead to perceived discrimination. So even if we're not meaning to be discriminatory to another person, something that we say that's influenced by technical bias may be perceived by that person as discriminatory. So a recent study by the National Institute of Health found that perceived discrimination has links to various negative mental and physical effects. And these range from increased alcohol and tobacco use, physical pain, cardiovascular illness, breast cancer, obesity, high blood pressure, depression, and anxiety disorders. Additionally, perceived discrimination can affect various elements of job performance, including trouble focusing at work, absences, lack of commitment and job satisfaction, and an inability to complete tasks. So we mentioned that perceived discrimination is all about how someone else perceives what you're saying as discriminatory. So even being careful what we're saying, we might be discriminating against someone else. And one place that we can see this happen is when we sort of pare down something that we're saying to maybe get the point across better, but we do that out of just making an assumption of that person's knowledge level. And so while we do this thinking, well, this person maybe wouldn't understand what I'm going to say, that might actually be perceived as that they couldn't understand this. So now we're taking something that's not just a knowledge bias, but really a cognitive capacity bias. And finally, another consequence of this is that we're ultimately missing an opportunity for knowledge sharing to better the rest of the team that we work with.
Well, better or worse, we're not alone in this challenge. So for example, first, I'd like to reference in medicine, arrogance among certain roles, unfortunately has historically been challenging and problematic in medicine. In a survey by the Institute for Safe Medications Practices, they found that 40% of hospital staff felt so intimidated by a doctor that they did not share their concerns about orders for medication that they thought was incorrect. And unfortunately, as a result, 7% then reported that they actually contributed to a direct medication error. Now, luckily, by many accounts, physicians and nurses have seen less of this form of discrimination in the past few years. Increasingly, physicians are being seen as just one member in a broader care team, all who are working together towards the best outcome for the patient. However, it's still an issue, it's still much of a problem that the Joint Commission, which helps oversee many hospitals, is requiring them to have a written code of conduct and policy specifically around this form of discrimination. And we also can find examples in the aeronautical industry. An unfortunate example was a Canadian flight back in 2011. This airline was making an approach to land, and then unfortunately, tragically hit the side of the hillside in the high Arctic. Now, prior to the crash, a kind of apprehensive co-pilot repeatedly spoke up to the captain, indicating that something didn't seem right. And this was about 2.5 minutes prior to the crash. In a 20-second span, 5 times in the black box in the recording, they saw the co-pilot continue to, with more and more vigor, iterate like something is not right, but was ignored. Unfortunately, it was too late, and the airplane did crash. When the Transportation Safety Board was doing analysis afterwards, a quote, an exact thing they said here is that in the absence of clear policies or procedures allowing the first officer to take control, the first officer likely felt inhibited from doing so. And as we've researched this and talked to folks about it, we've heard a lot of, frankly, kind of excuses as to why this is acceptable or why this is okay. I'd like to potentially maybe myth bust a few of these if we could. So the first, and don't worry if you can't see every nitty-gritty here. I do love this graph, though. On the left side is a lot of various areas of study. And you notice down here in the bottom, there is computer science, which makes up a good chunk of it. On the right is a lot of various professions. And in the top right is software development, application development, system development, computer programming, kind of software development centric. And the thing I love about this is that there's a lot of areas of study where the people landed into a software development type of role. But likewise, a lot of folks who studied computer science who then went on to do something entirely unrelated. Now, admittedly, there is kind of this central curve here that there's a bit of a one-to-one relationship. They studied it, and that's what they've done as a career. But there's many paths between these. So just education really isn't a great justification for this form of discrimination. We've also heard arguments that this can be kind of written off as a left brain versus right brain. And this is a myth that's frankly commonly perpetuated, that the left brain somehow is more analytical, more mathematical and such, and the right brain is more artistic, more musical, more language-oriented. And there's been literally thousands of studies around this, more of us have disproved this. A more recent one from the University of Utah, they analyzed 1,000 brains, and they essentially saw no preferential use of one brain, or one side of the brain over another. What they did find instead is that it is the connections amongst all parts of your brain that engage in both creative and analytical thinking. And we've also heard this somewhat explained or justified through notions around personality, and particularly using personality tests and things like that. And the problem with personality tests is that it's a tool, but that tool certainly could be misused. And it does tend to rely on very binary choices. So for example, in the concept of being introverted versus extroverted, the reality is that none of us are 100% one of those, right? It's a spectrum, it's a gradient. We land somewhere on there. A lot of research recently has found that the tests really may be filtering out people according to traits that ultimately bear little impact on their potential as an employee. So much so, this method was, or these tools were used as part of hiring practices for a period, and it's actually resulted in quite a few lawsuits, because what's been found is that using these type of tests opens up the possibilities for adverse discrimination against other attributes of the person that we shouldn't be discriminating against, of course. And really, we found that the tests are often not predictive at success at the job. And lastly, intelligence sometimes is used to rationalize this. Some notion of your measure of your IQ or thing. There's an American psychologist, Lewis Terman, who in the 1920s created one of the kind of the foundational IQ measures out there right now. And his very well clearly stated goal was to try to show that IQ was a predictor of success. In more recent analysis, journalist Joel Shurkin kind of did a lot of work here and realized that whatever IQ test was measuring, it wasn't measuring creativity, right? That Terman's test did not measure work ethic. It didn't measure grit, qualities that psychologists such as Angela Duckworth have shown highly correlate and help give insight into a person's success. The reality is that most personality tests and aptitude tests, it's a shorthand. It's a way to render potential into a thumbnail, and it's just not sufficient. At its core, intelligence doesn't necessarily represent work ethic, your work capacity, your grit.
So what can we do to make sure that technical bias is not creeping in and negatively impacting our interactions with others? Well, we can evolve our communication. We've developed a two-part kind of process flow for how to do this. And the first part is to recognize your own bias. And so this kind of introspection can be very difficult to do on your own. So leverage your community for feedback. Solicit feedback from others to shine a light on your own bias blind spots, and be comfortable giving feedback to others when it's observed and when that's appropriate to share. And also, slow down, stop, and ask yourself what cues you might be using. Before you send that email off to someone you don't know and have never worked with before, think about, did you look at their role or title or education background, and how might that have influenced how you're communicating with them? Ask yourself, would you communicate the same information differently to someone of your same role, title, or educational background?
So once you recognize your own bias, really next is to kind of help negotiate the level of detail. And I present to you the world's perhaps simplest flowchart. We're trying not to make this that complicated. Is that essentially, do you have an established relationship with this individual? And you may, right? And if you do, and you've kind of already previously negotiated, this is how we're going to interact together, use that again, of course, right? We're not necessarily asking that every time you interact with someone, you go through this laborious kind of back and forth to establish this communication level. But if you haven't, frankly, ask, get consent. Like, you know, how familiar are you with this topic? Learn what level they would like to engage. I think a great example of this, and somewhat nerdy example, is actually the TLS handshake, which I love for this. As many of you, I'm sure, already know, TLS is an encryption protocol. And the client and server can support different versions, right? And they need to negotiate what common version they're going to talk over. So there's this back and forth. They announce what they can do, what they can't do, and such. And they come to an agreement between them, usually across the two of them, what is the highest level we're going to support. One doesn't assume the other supports one version or not. And this also, related to bias experience, is that we're not asking that you drown everyone in the most intense technical depth in every conversation you have. That's not very practical. And likewise, we're not expecting others to always ingest and learn everything that may be given to them through the fire hose. Rather, we're asking that in this communication, kind of respectfully allow each other to negotiate that technical level with which you want to communicate. So as a communication receiver, you may be asked kind of your knowledge level on a particular subject, and then you may be an expert in it, frankly. You need to understand that the purpose of you being asked that is that the transmitter is trying to be consistent, right? They're trying to make sure that they are delivering and giving everyone the equal opportunity to express with what level they want to communicate. Essentially, don't take offense that, right, on the receiving end. Like, acknowledge that the transmitter is trying to be equal amongst all their conversations. If you have a high level of experience in this topic, just let them know and you can move on. You can help in that negotiation. Again, no offense is intended.
And likewise, you may be asked your knowledge level on something that you really don't know much about. And in this case, within our communications framework, it's important that you feel and that you're made to feel that it's okay to say, I don't know. Because ultimately, being honest with your knowledge level on that subject is going to, A, ensure that people aren't progressing in a project thinking that you knew what was going on, and B, it really presents a learning opportunity for you to say, hey, I don't know anything about this, could you please inform me? And there are a couple ways that I see that kind of prevent this positive outcome from happening. One is imposter syndrome, where we think, I don't know what's going on, everyone else knows, and they're going to find out that I don't belong here. And another is through kind of self-deprecation. And this is something that I've done and that I've seen in a lot of meetings, where once things start to get in the weeds, I can say, well, I'm not really technical, so I don't really need to worry about this. Or maybe it's, well, this isn't a technology that I deal with, so I don't need to pay attention. So if your role is not traditionally technical, or if it is and you're getting in over your head on something, stop them, let them know your actual knowledge level in that, and really seize that opportunity to learn more.
So as we land, we'd like to leave you with 3 takeaways, if you can get anything out of this. First is pause at the start of every interaction and be conscious of the biases that you may be bringing into that interaction. And this purpose is technical experience, but any other forms of biases you might be bringing in. When in doubt, consent. Ask and agree on the level of technical detail with which you want to engage. And then frankly, when in doubt, err in the favor of the other person. A while back at a chef conf, there was a conversation between Kelsey Hightower and Jacob Adams, and there's this great quote from them, was that in all interactions, err in the favor of the other person. So that if you make a mistake, you are helping them and hurting yourself, right? Give them the benefit of the doubt. We thank you guys for your attention. Please give us feedback. We appreciate it. You're welcome to tweet us. We'll also be in the hallway afterwards. We frankly are still learning a lot in this area. We would welcome your commentary and your feedback. Feel free to come talk to us. Thank you.